everyone, I'm Rebecca and welcome back to my sewing room. This week we are continuing on the progress with the Deronda riding habit. So this is an 1870s style riding habit from the movie Deronda, and this week we are going to hopefully get some of those more finishing touches going on with the bodice. I don't know if I will actually finish the whole thing. I would love to say that I will, but I don't think it's in the cards because it's already Friday evening. Again, yeah. More of that whole car insurance thing that I've talked about in other videos going on and all of that sort of stuff taking up my life. Also, Lion had his surgery this week. He is back home recovering. We're now about 48 hours out from his surgery. So he is doing so much better than he was when I first picked him up. And hopefully he will have a speedy recovery and get through the 2 weeks of cone wearing without too much of a hassle for him. Anyway, you are here though, probably. You might even be here for dog updates, I don't know, but probably you're more here for sewing updates. So the first thing that I'm going to be doing this week is I'm going to actually go ahead and put my corset, my undergarments, all that sort of stuff on and try on the whole thing that I have so far. And there's two things that I really need to check with that. The first is that I haven't actually tried having the sleeves on and stuff with the corset on. When I set the sleeves, was it last week, I think, or the week before? Whenever I did that, when I set the sleeves, I wasn't wearing a corset, so I couldn't really put the jacket on all of the way to make sure that it was fitting perfectly correctly. And then the other thing that you may remember me talking about from my last video, which if you haven't seen the last video, by the way, I will link all of the videos of this project so far down below in the description. But the other thing that I was talking about was I'm a little bit concerned when I look at it on the dress form here that the bodice may actually be a little bit too long for what I'm going for. Now granted, this does have the seam allowance still attached, so it should still be a ½ inch too long, no matter what, but I feel like it's significantly more than a ½ inch. And that may just be an issue of looking at it on the dress form, which is short-waisted, versus looking at it on me, I'm longer-waisted. So I'm hoping that that's the case, but if all else fails, I can go ahead and I can shorten that. I need to do it now though, before I go into doing the collar facing and everything. So I am going to go ahead and get changed into all of this sort of stuff. But while I'm doing that, let's go over to sponsor Rebecca for a little word from today's sponsor. Thank you, Sewing Rebecca. Sponsor Rebecca here, and today's video is kindly sponsored by Skillshare. I've talked about Skillshare on my channel several times before, but if you haven't yet heard of Skillshare, it is an online learning community for creative and curious people. On Skillshare, you can find thousands of inspiring classes on topics including photography, art, productivity, personal finance, and even sewing. In fact, I've always been curious about learning how to drape garments for sewing, so I just took Introduction to Draping, taught by Anya Ayangchi, winner of Season 9 of Project Runway. While it did reinforce that you basically need a dress form that actually represents your measurements in order to drape for yourself, it was really helpful to see the way that she tapes out the lines of the garments onto the form before starting in on the actual draping. One of the things that I really like about Skillshare is that it's really easy to pause, rewind, or rewatch classes as often as you like, and each class is broken up into little bite-sized chapters, because they know that most of us have really busy schedules. And the great news is that the first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare so that you can explore your creativity. Use my link down in the description to get your free trial of Skillshare today and unlock your limitless creative potential. And now, back to Sewing Rebecca. So first off, I know that it's obviously completely out of frame, but this skirt is comically long. It is a good foot too long in the front for me. I mean, that's how it's supposed to be. It's a riding skirt. It's supposed to be able to drape nicely over the horse, but it is interesting to walk around the room in. So the other thing that I'm noticing though, as far as the cut of everything here goes, and I'm looking at all of my reference images, I keep them printed out so that I can just refer to them. I do highly recommend doing this if you are making any sort of reproduction of a costume, whether that's cosplay or historical or movie or this, or you've kind of got everything all combined. But I keep these here so that I don't have to go on my phone. I have them large, you know, they're very easy to reference. And the main one that I'm referencing here right now is this one right here. So with this image, I can really look at, okay, where do my points need to be, but also where does the cut need to be over the hip? Because I think that is where I'm not quite right here. I think that my points, they're actually, the length I think is quite good. I may need to bring up the center just a skosh. I want to fold it and pin it and see if, like, just by taking the seam allowance out, if that becomes the right line, the right height in the center, which I think it's going to, but it's really the curve over the hip that is super, super off. So you can see right now where I have the bottom of the hip curve right here. So it goes down pretty low, and granted this does have that 1/2 inch seam allowance in it, but over on this side I folded it up quite a bit. I think I folded at least 1.25 inches up by the time it gets to about here, and then gradually decreasing that down to about 1/2 inch at the point. And I mean, they're super bulky here, especially on the dart, because we've got like 8 layers or something on the dart where it's folded. But I think that this is really more the cut that I want. It's very a high cut over the hip, and that allows you to see the pleating of the skirt, and that's what this side was really blocking. It's blocking a lot of that pleating, so that by the time you see the skirt, the pleats are just kind of loose and wherever they want to be, whereas up here you can really see, like, okay, pleat here, pleat here, pleat here. So I'm pretty sure that this is the right cut, so I am going to press this just to make sure and pin it and do that the same on both sides, again, just to make sure. And I'm going to do that here with this center one as well. Now this will have either a facing or like a bias tape turn in. I'm not positive which one yet, but it's gonna have one of those. But for now, I am just gonna fold and press and see what happens with that. But yeah, I think that this is much more the right here. Now the other thing that I'm noticing is the sleeves do fit great. I mean, I'm happy with everything up here, but I'm glad that I checked because they're too long. They should not be quite this long over the hand. Right now, I mean, my wrist is right here, and you can see it's coming a good like 2 inches past there. So I do want to lose a little bit of that length for where I start the cuff. I'm probably going to cut off only about 1/2 inch, maybe 3/4, because by the time you take the seam allowance out too, I mean, I'm gonna be a shorter width. So right now I've just folded up here what I think is about 1 inch, possibly 1.25 inches, and you can see that's a much better length right there. So 1/2 inch of that is going to be seam allowance, and that's great, but I'm going to cut off a little bit more before I do the cuff. The cuff is going to be the next thing that I'm doing here, just because it's easy enough that I don't feel daunted. I need to draft the cuff. I can't actually do the cuff yet because I am in a slight hold for trim. Now the trim on this is sort of it's a deeper tone than the actual, you know, rest of the garment. And in the original, it almost looks kind of a navy, but hers is more of a blue riding habit, whereas mine is more of a greenish blue, kind of this like sagey green. So my trim is slightly harder to find because I can't just go for navy. So I have already sourced from Amazon this braided trim right here, and I am not a big fan. I think for one thing it looks very shiny and fake, and it's also like very light blue against the green. Yeah, it's not really doing it for me. But Joann's actually has a trim that's a 1/2 inch braided trim that they call Peacock, and my closest Joann's could not find theirs. They're supposed to have 21 yards, could not find it. But my next closest Joann's, they do have it. So I think I'm gonna go over there either later tonight or tomorrow, swing by and pick that up and bring this fabric with me to see if it will even be an option or if maybe they have a different option. But it's going to be a lot easier for me to put the trim on the cuff before I put the cuff on the sleeve. So I can't actually do that. And likewise with the collar, I don't know, with the collar I may have to do the trim after I put the collar facing on. But yeah, this is all the scary stuff this week, you know, when you're talking about like the buttonholes and the trim and the facings and like making sure it all fits right, which by the way, I did notice one other potential fit issue, which is, I don't know if this is even showing up on camera, but I feel like there's a kind of a weird wrinkle going on under the arm here, kind of from the side into like the side back. And I think that that is just something where I need to take the seam in just a skosh. And I'm not sure if it's the side seam, like the armpit is fine. It's the, you know, right about here. I don't know if it's going to be the side seam or if it's going to be the side back seam. One of those I think is going to need to come out just or come in, I guess, just a little bit to make that a little bit tighter. But I don't want to do that until I do the buttons and everything, because that may change things. And I'm really scared of doing the buttons because I hate button closures. They just, I talked about this like in the first video. They just always make my brain hurt because I feel like I'm going to do them wrong. Anyway, I am going to make these little changes, see how things happen, see how they look once I've done this, and I will show you and tell you what I'm going to do. So as I've been doing all of the folding and everything that I just talked to you about, there's one other thing that I noticed that I don't know why I didn't notice it earlier, and I'm a little afraid to try to attempt it now because it's going to mean cutting into this fabric. But I noticed that right here, this bit right here with the buttons, this actually sticks out and the collar comes from here, not from the edge. So that means, I think, that I need to cut. I've made a little mark both where it would be and then with the seam allowance where it would be. I think that means I need to cut it about probably at least 1 1/4, if not 1.5 inches in, and then kind of reshape the edge of this collar over here so that because like right now, when this overlaps, you can see that, I don't know, you know, it goes all the way down here for one thing, which I don't want because it's supposed to be in the center. And also it feels wider. Maybe that's just an optical illusion. I'm not really sure, but it feels wider than this side. And I think that that is because of this issue going on right here. So I'm really nervous about this, but I think it's what I need to do. I think I have to cut it. And then the other bit is that I realized when I had pinned it out like this, I had just pinned it so that it fit, but that actually was going a lot farther in than what my overlap is supposed to be, the overlap with the seam allowance. And that would make things weird for where it comes together right here. So I then tried it with just pinning where it's supposed to be here. And I wound up obviously with a lot of extra fabric because it was at least inch and a half, maybe even 2 inches too big. So I think that that is also going on, what's going on here. And I think that it's just that I have to take in this like side back seam and get it so that I'm taking out about 1 inch of fabric by the time it gets to the waist on each side, and like taper it up to where it meets the arm's eye. So I'm gonna try that. Hopefully that works. And yeah, I've pinned this in place, but of course that's gonna get changed a little bit once I take out that inch in that seam. So we'll see how that goes. I think we are a lot closer now. For one, I did shorten the sleeve. I took about like, I think 3/4 of an inch off of the sleeves. So at this point with the seam allowance folded up, that should be perfect. The other thing that I did on the sleeve, I felt like when I was looking at the pictures of her, you can see the cuff of, I think, just like her shirt, her riding habit shirt underneath. You can see the cuff of that because the cuff of the jacket kind of opens up a little bit. So I actually undid this seam just about like 3 inches or so, and just on the back side here, and this now I tapered out just a little bit so that by the time it reaches the bottom, it's probably about like a 1/4 inch or a, what would that be, 5/16 of an inch seam allowance right down here at the bottom. This I left the same, so it's still a 1/2 inch seam allowance on this side. I did that on both, and then I have folded up and pinned in place all of the bits here. I did take in that side back seam over here. I think that is really helping with the fit. I wonder if I didn't quite take it in enough because I felt like the overlap at the waist, I don't know, I feel like there's still a little bit that could come out at the waist, but it's so close that I think I'm just gonna leave it. And in doing that though, I did taper it out to the regular 1/2 inch seam allowance by the time it gets to the bottom. And what that has caused, I don't know how much you can tell, but the bodice is like super hanging away from the hips. It's way too wide at the hips right here. It also does have that extra bulk of like folding in the too much length because this is all just folded still and pinned, but it definitely needs to be taken in at least a little bit. So I think that's both a side seam thing and also the seam that I just took in, which is going to be annoying because then I'm going to have to like level that seam. But because I'm folding in so much, that should be okay to level it, because if I'm taking it in, basically those are two different length pieces and they're going to meet weirdly by taking it in down at the bottom. But I definitely need to take in that bit down here. The waist, again, pretty darn good. So I'm just going to curve it in or taper it in from the waist to my new hem spot. But I think that the length is right. And I just like folded the edge in here because this will be a seam allowance with the facing. And I folded it in. I haven't done this bit yet because I'm still afraid to. And I wanted to see how everything else would work first. So I am going to fix this little flappy bit here. And then we'll see about this because I'm scared. So this is definitely better. I wound up just taking it out of the side back seam and just basically continuing where I had taken an inch out of the waist, continuing that down all the way. And for some reason on this side, it is laying beautifully. Like this is exactly what I want. But this side, it is sticking up on this panel and I'm not sure why. I probably need to compare the two panels to each other to see if maybe I somehow did this one, like I took in a little bit more on this side than I did on this side. But otherwise, I need to figure out how to get a little bit out of there. Maybe it's possible that it could have even just like stretched or something. But yeah, it's just doing something weird over here. I don't know if it's how I pinned it or what, but something is strange. So it's a small little quibble though, and that means that it's time to figure this bit out. And I'm really scared. But I think I just have to cut it. I want someone like holding my hand and to tell me it's okay. I don't like cutting something that I've like already put this much work into. But if I don't cut it, then I'm gonna get this sort of crossover. And it obviously won't be as obvious when it's not white, when you're not seeing the inside of this, when you're seeing the facing instead. But I don't know how I missed it on hers, that's how hers works. But that is how hers works. I don't know. I'm really scared. Maybe I won't. Maybe I'll just leave it like this. I think I'll ruminate on that for a minute or two and look at cuffs instead because, yeah, I'm scared. So anyway, I'm going to create the cuff. The cuff should be pretty straightforward other than the fact that it has that little overlapping curve bit instead of just meeting edge to edge on this side. So it will overlap with two curves. I showed a picture of that to you in last week's vlog, I believe. It's in one of the ones on my table, but I'm not going to show it to you right now because I don't know which page it is. So I'm going to go ahead and try to draft that up and see how that goes. Actually, quick addendum. It's been about 1 second. But the thing that I just realized is that if I do this, it actually needs to happen on both sides. Because if you look closely at this, I mean, the collar does not meet itself right here in the center. So therefore, this bit that sticks out, that's happening on both sides. I don't know if that makes me less scared or more scared, but it does need to be cut on both sides to get it to look exactly like this. I almost feel like it makes me less scared, oddly. So maybe I will go ahead and give it a try, but I think I'm still gonna do cuffs first. And this is why this wasn't laying right. The top side is the one that was fitting right. The bottom part under here is the one that wasn't. And what I realized is like this, it's totally not the same. I don't know. Yeah, I think you can tell that those seams do not match up. And then you can really tell when you get down here and see, oh, there's excess back here. So this seam just needs to be taken in more, and that way it will wind up meeting the other side that does actually fit. So I just eyeballed when I took it in. I didn't measure. So clearly I took it in more on this side than I did here. And I'm just going to fix this one to match that one. So what I'm doing here to create the mock-up for this cuff is I've taken a piece of canvas and it is 4 inches tall. I'm thinking that my cuff is going to be 4.5 with seam allowance. So this does include the seam allowance down at the bottom because the sleeve has the seam allowance there. It does not include the seam allowance at the top or on the sides where it meets because I want to actually play with the shape and I'm not going to use this as part of it. I'm just going to use this as the pattern. So I first kind of did a rough estimate of like, I laid the sleeve flat onto canvas that was just flat and drew in, okay, this is where it equals flat. Now I need an overlap and I want a curved top. That wound up being too big because I just allowed for way too much overlap. So now what I'm doing is I have pinned it around and I've made sure to like hold the sleeve out like this so that I hopefully don't get that problem where the cuff winds up making my sleeve smaller that I've had before. And I wanted an overlap of just like a little bit. So I don't know that you can see that at all because I have a pin on it, but there's an overlap of I think like a 1/2 inch in there where you can see like that's where the orange line is going to be that I think I'm going to use to cut. And then that is that 1/2 inch overlap right in there. So now I think that this cut line is going to work so that I get sort of a tulip effect. This, by the way, is the picture that I have of how that works. So that's what I'm going for. And I also had, when I pinned this on, I actually put the bodice back on and then pinned it while I was wearing it, pinned it in just like 2 places while I was wearing it so that I could figure out where this was going to lay on the sleeve because this overlap does not line up with the seam. It's a little bit, I think that's closer towards the front where the seam is like farther back from my elbow. So anyway, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to now cut this line and hope that that is going to work. And if so, then I will just add seam allowance to this pattern and use this to cut out my pieces. Okay, so I mostly like it, but what I didn't factor in is that I have my hand in the sleeve and I'm like holding this out. I didn't factor in the fact that the sleeve gets wider as it goes up. So there's not quite as much overlap right here as I think I would have liked, or rather it's like it's the underneath overlap that there's not as much. I kind of like that shape, but I'm a little bit worried that this is gonna go too far down if it is held apart. Can't do this with the camera in my hand. So I have to figure that out, and if I need to, I can extend this like a 1/4 inch up here and not have this, like right now this is looking like it's leaning back that way and it needs to be like straight up and down. So that might just be something too that I can check out like when I'm patterning it or when I'm actually cutting it, that this is like a 90-degree angle until it starts to curve. Okay, I got it to kind of lay in place while my hand was in there, and actually I think that's good. I think that is going to be just perfect once I add the seam allowance, and there is my pattern. So I know I'm kind of all over the place as far as like what I'm working on since I was just working on the cuff, but I decided to take this moment to do the thing as well and cut the bit, and I did it right. It works. So look at this. I mean, obviously we've got the seam allowance here, and this is going to need to be like notched out further, and then I also cut the facing. So I'm not going to notch it until I put the facing on just because it's better, you know, smarter to do that. But there it is. There she goes. That is the little overlap I wanted. That is the collar. I mean, once the seam allowance is gone, that is the collar coming together like I wanted. So yay, I'm so excited. And that is kind of making me want to, instead of jumping right to the cuff, I think I'm going to go ahead and cut out the horsehair canvas for the facing and attach those together, because then I can just put the facing on and that would be excellent. I may have to leave a little bit of a bit where I can like put the trim into so that I don't have the trim ends kind of, you know, loose in here, or maybe they'll just continue in. I'm not really sure where the ends will go, but I haven't picked up the trim yet. So I also need to get buttons because I thought I had buttons that would work for this and mine are all way too small. Her buttons are really freaking huge. So I need to get more green thread because I am nearly out of this green thread, and I need to get the buttons and I need to get the trim option. And of course, Joann's closes in an hour and a half, and I'm kind of on a roll here and I don't want to go to Joann's, but if I don't go now, then it will close. So anyway, I think I'm gonna try to do this bit first, because otherwise I have to get back dressed up in the corset and everything, and I just want to see if this will close. And I know that you're telling me right now, just take your corset off and go to Joann's. Okay, I will. I'll take the corset off. I'll go to Joann's. I'll come back later. I'll put the corset back on, and then I'll keep working on all this. I am back from Joann's. I got my thread, and I've got options. So I'm really not sure which I prefer. I put a poll out on my Instagram story, so if you saw that story, you know what time I'm filming this. I did the poll literally while I was in the store, hoping that some of you would answer while I was still in the store, even though it was about to close, and you did. Most people so far are going with the blue, but I did also like the green, so I'm not really sure which one I will wind up choosing. We'll see what you tell me to do on Instagram. And by the way, if you're not following me on Instagram, that is at Lady Rebecca Fashion, so go check out my Instagram. But yeah, we'll see which one I decide to do. I really am completely torn. I'm not sure at this point. And then speaking of torn, I also got a lot of options of buttons. I was just gonna get 3 options, but then it was like buy 3, get 2 free. So I was like, okay, well, I'll get one other option. So I couldn't find anything really that looked exactly like her buttons. The closest one would be this, which isn't gonna even work because it's reflecting light. It's just a flat silver, but I feel like it looks A, too small, and B, just kind of cheapy because it's like this flat silver. So it is the closest one to what she's wearing. I don't know that I like it. So my other options, I got this, which I think is the same size, and again, I think it might be too small, but they are little horses, so I thought that was kind of cute because it's horses. And it's a riding habit, so, you know, fun. And also in the same size, I got these just because I kind of like this pattern, this like leafy pattern. It feels both smooth and interesting at the same time. And lastly, because I really do think that I want a slightly larger button, I got the horse one. Oh, it just dawned on me. I'm pretty sure she has buttons on her cuffs, and I forgot to buy buttons for the cuffs. Those are just decorative buttons, so like I don't need to make a buttonhole or anything for those. I can always just add them later. But the last one that I got for the front of the bodice are the horses in the larger size. So I mean, if all else fails, these are too big for cuff buttons. So I think they had them in a smaller size. I'm not really sure, but I could potentially find them or something similar for a smaller size for the cuffs. So lots of metal buttons. I'm not sure which one I'm gonna go with, but we will cross that bridge when we get to being ready to do buttonholes. But for now, we do facings. So I am going to cut out the horsehair canvas parts of the collar facing. I'm also going to cut out, I think, 1 layer of horsehair canvas. I think 1, maybe 2 layers of horsehair canvas for the cuffs, as well as the wool for the cuffs, making sure to add that 1/2-inch seam allowance on the sides and top. And then I should be good to go to start putting all of that together. So if you remember from when I was working on the facing maybe 2 or 3 videos ago, I don't remember when I started this, I had cut out the wool and had put this bias tape around the edges because that is what it said to do in the McCall's pattern that I kind of used for the base. That was this McCall's pattern, 8123. And then I realized, oh shoot, I didn't have the interfacing in there. That was the first video actually, because then I went and ordered the interfacing and it got here during the second video. So this is horsehair canvas interfacing. This is what I'm using for both the facing here on the jacket collar area and also for the cuffs. I have now cut out all of the cuff pieces. I did cut 2 pieces of the horsehair canvas for that because this is it just feels really lightweight, this canvas. I don't know if I'm going to use both. We'll see when I actually go to put that together, but I decided I wanted to do this first to get this out of the way. And so what I've done now is I have sewn all along the edges, just like a little bit in, 1/4 inch or so in, and just sewn it with the machine so that I could combine these together. And I also, like where I already had the bias tape, I just sewed like just a tiny bit over from the where I had sewn the bias tape down, so that way it is enclosed within the bias tape when I go to press this out. And I had a little bit of excess, so I do need to cut off some of it, but yeah, I had undone the center back seam that I'd already done on this facing so that I could put the interfacing in the center back seam. So I wound up undoing the bias tape right here and then undoing the seam putting it all together and then redoing those. So that's where I'm at right now. And now I think I'm at the point where I can press this out, like press the bias tape so it faces out again, and go ahead and sew it in to the bodice over there. So a little nervous, but keep your fingers crossed. Hopefully this will go all right. So I have attached the facings right sides together with the bodice collar and front section. And what I'm doing now is I'm going through and I'm clipping corners, trimming them on this type of corner, and I'm also clipping through the curve of the collar because otherwise there would be too much fabric to fold into the curve, so you have to clip little divots out of it. And I've clipped this corner down here as well, and then hopefully everything will successfully turn over and press nicely in place. I did notice when I was pressing this seam right here on the collar that the horsehair canvas was not really liking being pressed, so hopefully the edge will be a little bit nicer to me. I have a feeling I may also top stitch the edge once I have pressed it just to really get a clean finish. And then of course the braid trim will go on as well. Pretty certain I'm going with the blue. That's what's winning in the poll right now, but I will check the poll again, and I'm liking the blue at best anyway as well. So before I turn this right side out, I am pressing this open, and you do kind of need to cut it first because you want it to be able to curve. So I have my pressing ham in here right now, and I'm just pressing this open because what that's going to do is it's giving me a clean starting point right here so that when I then turn it and press from the outside, I already have a nice clean fold. And this is what it looks like after it has been pressed. So yeah, it's super thick. This is not the type of wool that you really want to do much tailoring with, but here we are. It's crazy thick. I'm super worried about how I'm going to do buttonholes because, oh my God, I mean, I don't know if you can tell, but like that is really, really thick. And it doesn't really fit my dress form, so that's normal. Most things don't, but I think that that is looking right. So other than how thick this wool is, I really am pretty happy with how things are looking. I think that this is going to all close just like how I was wanting with, you know, everything that I was so afraid of right there. So I don't know, I'm keeping my fingers crossed. It's pretty late, it's like 1:45 in the morning, so I'm not gonna put the corset on now to try this all on. I'm gonna start off tomorrow by putting the corset on again, and that way I can make sure everything is as it should be. Right now I have the facings pinned down right here. I haven't even bothered to pin the inside of this part here because that's easier done over a form, and I figure I will put it on myself to see if it's even remotely right. If it is, then I will pin those all on in place, and hopefully I won't stab myself with the other pins. That's the other thing. Down here, I'm wearing a corset. It's harder to stab myself. Up here, if I have lots of pins inside my bodice here, it is pretty easy to stab myself. So I do have one that is right in the back that's holding the collar like in place there. And the collar's looking nice in the back too. So I think that it's doing what I want. And assuming that that all fits correctly, then I will go ahead and I may or may not do the edge stitching. I'm not sure because putting the braid on may actually act similarly to edge stitching. It's not going to be right on the very edge, but it's pretty close. And so I think that I can kind of get away with not doing edge stitching and just doing the braid. And I'm also like 99% positive that I'm doing the blue braid here. The last time I checked about like a half hour ago on the poll, it was almost like half as many people were saying green. I think it was like 75 to like 130. So yeah, 75 green, 130 blue, and I agree. I'm liking the blue a lot better. That was what I had initially thought was going to be the best one anyway. And the other question then is, because this is a directional braid, do I care about one direction? You know, do I want to mirror it or do I want to just loop it around? Because if I mirror it, I have to have a seam in the back. I don't think I like the idea of mirroring it that much. I don't know. I'll have to play with it tomorrow, but that won't come until after I make sure that this actually fits correctly. So yeah, pleased with that. I don't even remember if I told you this, but I did cut off the excess along the hip where we were working on that earlier. And then of course the cuff pieces are cut out and ready to be assembled. So that'll be a tomorrow thing as well. So my hope tomorrow is that we can get cuffs done, we can get the hand sewing all done in here and the braid put on, and hopefully maybe even buttonholes, assuming that I can do them on machine. Yeah. Actually, that kind of makes me think I want to look at buttons right now. So I'm going to look at buttons, then I'm going to go to bed. So I'm still not sure if I love the texture and pattern of the horsey ones, but the size does seem to be right. I mean, just looking at that, I can get away with 5 buttons. I do like that hers are kind of flat-ish, but the ones that I found that were flat are A, too shiny, and B, too small. So I think these are gonna have to do, because again, the spacing seems really good. Like the amount of space in between the buttons seems really on par with hers. So I think I'll go with those and maybe switch them out at some point in the future if I can find better ones. The other good thing is that even though these are probably way too large for the cuffs, because I did confirm, yes, she has 2 buttons on each cuff, I'm pretty positive that they had these in a slightly smaller size as well. Like, I think there was one that had 4 to a card. So I'll just have to go back and get those later to put those on the cuffs. It is now Saturday evening and I am back to sewing. I've decided that before putting everything on, I might as well go ahead and try the cuffs. So far what I've done is I did decide to do 2 layers of the horsehair canvas. Hopefully that was the right choice. But I have serged, flatlined the horsehair canvas to the wool, all 4 pieces. And then on 2 of the pieces, these 2 pieces, I've gone around and marked an orange line 1 inch in from the edge using my friction pen. And that is where I'm going to center the trim over. I think it's going to be best if I put the trim on now. Hopefully I'm not wrong about that, but I'm going to try it with like one of them and then assemble the cuff. And yeah, and the reason that I decided about that was because if I wait to put the trim on after I already have put the cuff together, then I think that means it will wind up closing the cuff together here. And the way that I'm planning on doing this is to like encase the sleeve end within the closure so that it can then just like fold up. I might be doing this totally wrong, but if I put the trim on both layers, it would make it so that I can't then put the cuff, put this on there in that method. I hope that made some sort of sense. So I'm going to test with one to see if that is the right solution, and hopefully it works. If it does, I'll do the other, and if it doesn't, I guess I'll be having a lot of fun with my seam ripper undoing that experiment. This is so thick and I haven't even really like started, because with doing this method, you do, if I'm remembering this correctly, you do the right side of the coat together with the inside of the cuff and you sew along there. And this one is further complicated by the fact that it overlaps, so I'm not positive how to manage that bit, but you do that and then that part gets turned inside once that's sewn, and this gets done like folded over the outer side of the cuff, folded over and like stitched like that. And I just feel like if I do that, it's gonna be like an inch thick. It's gonna be so ridiculous. And then there's the other thing of this probably does not fit around my free arm, so of course it's getting it all in the machine when it is so small and fiddly. And I'm really debating about doing this the cheater method, which I don't know if this is a legit method for cuffs. If it is, let me know, because I feel like it's the cheater method, which is where you put it so that you treat the cuff all as one layer and you just put the seam allowance like up in here, and you figure that once you have the cuff on like that, you're never going to unfold the cuff, so it doesn't matter if the seam allowance is just like up in there. So I'm debating about doing that because I feel like that might make it just a tiny bit more manageable or less thick or whatever. Because this, I mean, like, oh my god, this is like, it's so thick. I don't know what to do. Oh my god. Right now, without turning any layers up or anything like that. Just literally holding it right here like a sandwich, and also not counting the part where it's gonna overlap on the side where the seam is. Right now, the regular amount of layers here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 layers. And again, when you add seam allowance in there, add 4 to that, and then you're gonna overlap it. So the overlap part, that would be 20 layers, I'm pretty sure, because it's an overlapped seam allowance. What was I thinking? What was I thinking? So speaking of thinking, I'm gonna think on this for a little bit. I may actually come back and do the whole try on bit first, because that at least is not so stressful as this thick cuff. But I think I'm gonna go eat dinner and then figure out what I'm doing. Okay, I am back from dinner and I think I have hopefully figured this out. So I actually went and I took another pretty thick bodice that I made back in 2020, which is the velvet ribbon bodice. And the bodice itself isn't thick, but once we started to talk about velvet cuff, it did turn quite thick quite quickly. And I did kind of a weird, complicated version of that cheater method that I was talking about before, where this is what it looks like inside of the cuff. So you can see where like the seam allowances are actually butting up against each other, and then it's been whip stitched down inside, and that all winds up folding in so that you get a cuff that looks like this. So this is the cuff unfolded and this is the cuff folded in on itself on the sleeve. And I think that that is the answer to what I'm doing here too, though of course this is further complicated by A, it being even thicker, particularly where the overlap is, and B, the overlap itself is complicating. So we'll see how this goes. I think that the answer to the overlap is literally just going to be me like whip stitching it in place to get it to lay right and cover up the hidden secrets. But basically what will wind up happening here is I'm working on my first tester right here, and I have put this on so that the sleeve itself was inside out. So you have the interior or the lining of the sleeve facing out, and over that I have put right sides of the cuff, as in the side with the braided trim here, together with that. So it's right side to wrong side and done inside out. And then that, once you fold that out, you get a weird thing like this. And basically what's going on here is I actually have excess that I'm going to cut off because the inside of the cuff winds up being shortened, so that although there is like the seam allowance here, this seam allowance will wind up just butting right up against it, not overlapping or anything, which is what it wants to do right now. And it will just butt right up against it. I'll whip that together so that it doesn't like lose itself. And then that gets folded, and you get a bit of the cuff on the interior of the sleeve, which is good because my lining is white, so it'd be super obvious, especially because I've got serging there too. And then the mess is inside here where you're really not going to see anyway because it's all nice and tight. So that's what I'm going to give a try. This one, again, it just like there's a lot to hide here where the opening is, so that will involve, I think, hand whipping. But I am going to attempt to finish this and do then the same thing on the other and hope that I can repeat it. Well, I feel like it looks pretty ugly and incredibly thick, but it does at least fit over my wrist, so I guess it's got that going for that. It'll need a lot of hand tacking, but let's go ahead and try the other one. Both cuffs are now on. I haven't done the whip stitching on the inside of the cuff yet, so I do need to do that, and I need to do like the tacking or whatever on the outside to keep the laps together, but they are on at least. And the second one did go a lot smoother than the first, mostly because I had already cut off a 1/2 inch of the width of the interior of the cuff. I cut that off before I even started putting anything together. So that made things way, way easier. And now I'm going to go take a little break to work on memorization for Into the Woods and come back and put this all on and see how it's gonna go. You guys, it's fitting so nicely. Look at this. Oh my gosh, I'm excited. This is This is very pleasing. I mean, like, I've got it just pinned right here and right here right now. It's really hard to pin this because it's so thick. So again, doing the buttonholes are going to be super, super interesting here. But the collar is laying nicely. The closure is coming to where it is meant to go. The cuffs don't even feel that thick. This one is definitely like, it's slipping a bit where like you can kind of see the serging. So I don't love that. And maybe I can tack it or press it. Again, I haven't tacked it or anything even here yet. So maybe when I tack it there, I can also tack it through to the sleeve underneath so that it won't kind of roll forward, because that's the problem. It's just, it's so thick that it's like rolling forward. But yeah, look at that. I'm liking it. I definitely feel like it's a lot of green right now. Hopefully once I add the trim around the neckline, it'll be a little bit better, and the buttons, you know, a little bit better. Again, I also still have to do the finishing down here. So, and I'm still not sure whether that's going to be a facing or what. I mean, I feel like especially on the tail, like it should be some sort of facing, so otherwise you can see the white of the lining. So that, I don't know, that's probably gonna get a facing, but then it's gonna get heavy, so I'm really not sure. Maybe I'll just do like a 2 or 3 inch facing. I don't know. Honestly, that facing bit, I don't think I'm gonna get to that this week. But I am going to next go ahead and put the trim along the neckline. And what I noticed with the sleeves, so I had put the trim on before I did the other side of the cuff, you know, but I actually wound up doing another top stitching just like from curve to curve, and I top stitch it through all the layers. And what that did was it created a place where like it wasn't going to roll and go all funky on the edge there. So I think that that will really help with the collar as well. But yeah, I'm really excited with it. One thing that I do want to talk about, which I had honestly like not even thought about until yesterday, and I don't know why, is she wears a shirt with this, or at least she wears something where you see cuffs and you see this area filled in. And of course I didn't pattern this to go over a shirt because my brain was broken, apparently, was not thinking about a shirt. So I'm kind of thinking that I might want to go the chemise set route, and I could just sew in a little bit of white cuff down here if I care enough to do that. I don't know if I do. I might literally just do the chemise set route and not worry about the cuffs at all, just because it's going to add even more thickness and bulk and everything. And I think there's actually another of the Angela Clayton McCall's patterns that has a sort of like chemise set type top that I'm sure I could modify in order to get the riding habit look. So I think that that's something I'm going to do. The other thing that I hadn't thought about was the hat. Now I rewatched the scenes yesterday that are with the riding habit, because in all of my images that I've been using as reference images, she seems to be wearing 2 different hats. She seems to be wearing a black hat and also a tan hat that you can see there. However, I don't know where this black hat comes from, because I watched the movie. I watched episode 1, which I believe is the only episode that this riding habit appears in. Maybe I'm wrong, but I watched episode 1, and both scenes that she wears this in episode 1, she wears the tan hat. Of course, a tan riding hat is very, very difficult to find. I spent some time online yesterday looking for one and came up nothing, basically. So I have hats that may work if I go the black hat route, or I can find hats that will work if I go the black hat route. I don't have them yet. I also, you know, I'm not ready to do a photo shoot yet because I don't have time and it's not done and the shirt needs to be done and all that other sort of stuff. So all that being said, I think I'm actually going to wind up taking a break from this project next week and working on the Samantha Cloak project, and then coming back to this to do like the shirt and finishing and stuff like that. I know I'm talking about that way too soon because it's just Saturday night and I am going to go through Sunday with this, but to be perfectly honest, most of what is left for this week, other than buttonholes and the trim, is all hand sewing. So it's going to go really, really slowly. And in most of it's interior, so you're not really going to see much of anything. It's things like tacking down all of the facings and this and yeah, all of that sort of stuff. So If I can get to the facings down here by tomorrow, awesome. I don't think I'm going to though, but for right now, I'm gonna go put some trim on. The trim is on. I am going to have to undo just a little bit at the bottom because I took the machine stitching too far and it's showing on this side, like right there. So I will have to undo about 1 inch on each side there, and I'll just tack that down by hand, like whip stitching it or something like that. But that is done. And now I'm trying to decide for sure on the buttons. I mean, again, I do like the size of these, but they just seem so detailed and textured, and it's not really what I'm going for. And I'm also wondering if they're too large. So I decided to try just the flat metal ones again, even though I wasn't really a big fan of those yesterday. I do think they're too small, but I figure I will try like pinning them on and seeing. I only pinned 3 of the 5 on right now. The 5 do space out really nicely, but since these are smaller, 6 probably would space out nicely with these. So I'm gonna give these a try and see what they look like. Okay, yeah, I know. I literally just pinned on the first one and then like held up the second one. They're so mirror shiny. They're just awful. I do not like them, and they are too small. So I guess I will go with those larger ones and just have textured horsey buttons to go with my writing habit. The buttonholes are all done. I'm glad there were only 5 of them because I very much had to like steer the machine myself. Even though I was using a 1-step buttonholer, it was just too thick for it to slide nicely. So the stitch length really of the little zigzag of the buttonhole is entirely based on how fast or slowly I was pushing it through underneath that buttonhole foot. But I mean, they all look uniform, so that's great. I did do 2 test buttonholes first, and the first one I did actually wound up being too large, so I made it a little bit smaller and then tested another one, and that seemed great. So that's what I have here, and now I am going to cut those open and then do all of that hand sewing that I've been talking about. So I am going to be doing the tacking on here. I'm going to be doing the 5 buttons. I am going to be doing all of the tacking or sewing down of the lining, and also then the whip stitching down of the ends of here. So I'll be gone for a while doing all of that. Hopefully I will get all of that done before tomorrow night, and if there's anything interesting to report, I will report back, but otherwise I will see you once I finish all of that hand sewing. I decided I would go ahead and sew the buttons on first while I was still wearing the corset and everything, so that you could see what it looks like when it's all closed up with not with pins. So yeah, I mean, they're growing on me for sure, the horse buttons. I do obviously like the idea that they're horses and it's a riding habit. Like, I think that's just like cute little, you know, inside joke almost, cute little detail. But yeah, I think the texture is growing on me too, so I think that that will be just fine. So I'm gonna do a little bit more sewing, but I am gonna go ahead and get out of the corset because that was really the only other thing to like, you know, look at for fitting. And yeah, everything is fitting great. So I'm super happy with it. I will see you tomorrow at some point. And all of the facing is all sewn down, as are the cuffs and the pleats. So it is now Sunday evening, and in fact I will be heading off to rehearsal in about 20 minutes, and as you just saw, I got a lot of the hand sewing that I wanted to do done. Almost all of it. In fact, at first I thought, oh, I got all of this done, and then I remembered, no, I was also going to stitch down the inside of the cuffs where they met together. That I have not done yet. And actually, it just dawned on me as I'm saying that, I don't know that I can do that anymore either, because I was meant to do that before I stitched this part down. This part is stitched through the cuff so that it won't like unfold. So I can access the inside on like this part of the cuff, but I can no longer access it from over here. So you know what? I think we're gonna call that done. I think we're gonna say I'm not gonna worry about it, because 2 things. One, it is stitched here. It's not going to come undone. No one's going to see it. And 2, if you remember, I stitched through the edge of the trim right here. So it's not like it's just going to slip out and this fold is going to get all messy and stuff. That's not going to happen because that fold is stitched down. So it's just the interior of the cuff where things could slip around a little, but I kind of doubt that they're going to, because again, it's a pretty well-fitted cuff. It doesn't really have much room to go anywhere. So I think that's going to be good. We're going to call that good, which means I got all of my hand sewing done. And frankly, at that point, that means that the only thing I think left to do on this jacket is to do the hem facing. And I still have to figure out how exactly I'm doing that because the darts are just so bulky that I really am not sure what the best method is. So I'm gonna ruminate on that. As I mentioned before, that is not gonna be a next video thing. That's actually gonna be like in a couple of videos, and I will do that and I'll make the shirt, figure out the top hat situation, stuff like that. Things that I really hadn't thought to do in advance. And that will come later. And hopefully a whole finished thing, maybe even on a horse, that will all come as well. So you will have to wait a little bit to see more of that. But again, very, very happy with where we are right now. And I'm very excited to be able to move on to Samantha's winter cloak next week. So I hope that you're excited about a new project like that too, even though this one is not quite finished yet. If you did like this video though, please go ahead and click the thumbs up icon. And if you'd like to see more videos like this from me, please go ahead and click subscribe and the little bell icon to be notified every time I post a new video. I do post videos here on YouTube twice a week with my sewing vlogs like this out on Tuesdays and other costuming content out on Saturdays, but I post every day over on my Instagram, so please go follow me on Instagram. That's at Lady Rebecca Fashions. And if you'd like to help support all of the work that I do on this channel, I do have a link to my Patreon and my Ko-fi down in the description below. I'd also like to give a special shout out to my Edwardian level patrons, Sharon and Julie. And a huge thank you to today's sponsor, Skillshare. Again, if you want to get that free 1-month membership of Skillshare, you can go click the link down in the description. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Happy sewing!